pirate fashion, but make it safari. It's a shirt I bought myself for my birthday. It's been a minute. I think it's been over a month since I've filmed. So it might be slightly less than that since I've uploaded a video. A lot has happened. I've been so busy, most of it not good. The good thing though was I got married and the wedding was awesome. My tagline summary is even the introverts had a good time. So that was great. I would love to make some like dedicated videos about the wedding planning experience, like with my budgets and everything. I would love to do that. I have had zero brain capacity to do that. Because, let's see if I can remember all the shit that's going on. So the day before the wedding, we discovered that my catalytic converter had been stolen from my vehicle. I think my mechanic was more upset about that than I was. I should have been forewarned because it's been a mess. Mostly the insurance company is taking forever to get back to me. And then like once they make like a declaration, they like cancel your rental coverage. I'm like, cool, but I still have questions, so I can't make a decision yet, and you're not answering me. So I'm now 2 weeks without a personal vehicle. I've been borrowing vehicles from my mother and my mother-in-law here and there. So I'm kind of limping along. But yeah, we are not happy with the insurance, and whenever this claim is finished, we will be finding insurance somewhere else. So there's that. Work has been very busy. My department actually worked on a Saturday. All of us worked overtime on a Saturday, which we like never do. And it wasn't like any mismanaging on our part. It was just like the thing we needed to work on wasn't done until the weekend, and it couldn't wait until Monday for us to work on it. So got 10 hours of overtime on a Saturday. And then just like work has been stressful. Some people in our theater community have passed away, so I am surrounded by a bunch of very stressed out, very sad people. And like I'm also stressed out and sad like on my own, but then like, hey, I'm also a Pisces. I really absorb what people around me are feeling. A lot of that stress is like not directed at me. Like we're all doing the best we can. We're all very tired. So there's that. I'm finally getting over like this weird eye infection that I'm sure took its sweet time to recover because of how stressed I've been. Just in time for allergy season where my eyes will be watering constantly. Great. And then on top of all of that, there's all the shit going on in Ukraine and like all of the transphobic legislation shit that's going on in this country. I have a few extra, I always have like a couple of resources in my description box, but I have a few more specific ones. I don't really have much more capacity than just to throw some links out there if this is a moment when you feel like clicking on something. But I do want to say like one thing is it's kind of toned down a little bit, but like especially when the stuff in Ukraine was ramping up, I was seeing a lot of people talking about like how weird is it to like still make content, or like there was this ramping up of like people sharing links and sharing resources and talking about like all like I wish I could do more, I wish I could do more. And to that I want to say you can't pour from an empty cup. Just that if you like, do not worry about what you think you should be doing. Think of it as like what can you do in this moment? And, you know, this moment is going to look different than what you feel like you can do tomorrow. Because, like, keep in mind that, you know, the past couple of years have been nonstop trauma for all of us. Like, the whole, like, COVID-19, the escalation of the Black Lives Matter protests, and, you know, resurgence of variants and stuff. That has been, like, trauma waves that we haven't recovered from on top of all of this other shit. So like our capacity to do shit is compromised. So it's okay. You can't pour, if the only thing that you're capable of doing is taking care of yourself, do that. And don't worry about what you can't do. Like, for example, I personally like to be informed. I like to listen to the news when I drive to work and stuff, but I had to not listen to the news as much as I usually do because with my personal stresses and then the world stresses, I found that listening to the news was causing me to disassociate from my body while I was driving. And that doesn't help anybody. So I had to back off and listen to the news maybe like 2 or 3 mornings a week. Or like listen until I got to a story where I just, it's like, nope, I can't do this while operating a motor vehicle. And you know what? You do what you can right now. And that's going to look different than what you can do tomorrow. Don't worry so much about the should. The fact that you want to help is huge. So I hope that perspective is helpful. So if your brain needs a little bit of a break, let's talk about all the books I read in February. Because somehow, on top of all the wedding planning shit, I still managed to read some stuff. So I read 8 books and DNF'd 1. So the DNF I read was Perfect on Paper, which had nothing wrong with it. This was a YA queer romance. I just really wasn't in the mood for a contemporary romance. I wasn't in the mood for a YA romance. This book had been on my TBR because I'd heard it had really, really good queer representation, specifically bisexual representation. And from what I read maybe like a quarter of it. That is true. Like the representation is fantastic. But I think like that, if you had taken away that aspect of the setting and the characters and the dynamics, there was nothing else that I was really into. I could kind of see how the story was going to go. And it wasn't what I was in the mood for. It wasn't for me. I still think that, I can definitely see why it has been hyped. It's just not for me at this time. I do want to point out that like one of the author's motivations for writing this is she had heard a comment where someone, I don't know if they were critiquing her book or something else, but they were saying like a bisexual character doesn't count as queer if they end up in a male-female relationship. If they end up in a heteronormative passing relationship. To which the author was like, fuck you. Just because, like, no, a bisexual person is bisexual no matter what relationship they're in. That's kind of like the whole point. So that was kind of the onus of her writing. Is that the right use of the word onus? I don't know. That was her motivation for her writing this book, where she wanted a book where, you know, a female bisexual character had a romance with, I don't know if they end up together, because I didn't finish it, but, you know, has this romantic development with a male character, and the author, I think, had the goal of, like, maintaining that this character was still queer, no matter, like, who she ended up with. So I think that's really cool. So I hope that sounds interesting to somebody out there, and that I hope that if that sounds interesting to you and you pick it up, that you wholly enjoy it. It just wasn't for me at this time. Apparently what I was in the mood for was the first book I finished, which was this very dark, erotic series, the Thornchapel series. I read Harvest of Sighs, which is book 3. I think I've called this like a dark romance in the past, and I think technically it's not a romance because the books don't have happy endings, at least so far. They really don't have happy endings. Like, ooh, it just gets more and more dark. So be forewarned. I think it's like dark erotica or something. But so far, no happy ending and no happy ending in sight. But I know I'm still enjoying this series because it's like dark academia. It's like smutty dark academia vibes. this whole series like really digs into the overlap of pagan and Christian rituals, because there's you know, a lot of like seasonal Christian rituals that are based on local pagan beliefs. They kind of just absorbed stuff to help the transition of converting everybody. So this series really digs into digging up like those initial digging up those kind of forgotten pagan rituals and the purposes they served. Another thing that's worth noting about this series is we have a lot of instances of like there's definitely like BDSM elements in this series, and we have elements of like bad dominance. So like the dominant person in the relationship not, you know, this is not do not follow the example of these characters. We have examples of dominance like not really being clear on consent and boundaries. They're not always paying attention to how their actions are affecting the moods of their submissive. And it's not that they're inexperienced, and it's not that they mean to be harmful. It's that the setting, these people, they're like in their mid-20s. It's that they are so angsty and so conflicted and so tortured and under a lot of stress, and it's, you know, they don't mean to harm each other, but it's kind of just like they're dealing with so much of their own shit that they often kind of forget how to treat other people well. I think there are some moments where they kind of acknowledge and struggle with it, but this is also worth noting that like it's okay, not happy ever afters, and also like some of the relationships are not setting good examples, but like it's very aware of that. Like that's this, you know, this is not a Ronnie Lauren series. Like it's very aware that like these people are struggling to be whole, present, decent human beings in all facets of their lives. But I think like, you know, what is kind of like the fantasy of the erotica here that I find intriguing, and I think it's like the idea of like having overwhelming desires and like the idea of like consensual non-consent. I think like those are kind of the tropes that like I find interesting, because it's like in my real life like I could never, but I'm just really fascinated. Like the idea of like you couldn't stop yourself. Like I don't personally, like I don't understand that at all. So I find it really interesting to read about depictions of it. Don't psychoanalyze me. I think in this book, I think like the angry, angsty, self-torturingness of our characters kind of goes on too long, because like we've already had 2 full books of going through this. So I felt like there was some, yeah, like the self-angst, like the characters kind of beaten up on themselves was too repetitive and went on too long. We weren't really getting much new out of this book. So in this book, we focus on 2 women, Rebecca, who's the dominant, and Delphine, who is the submissive. And I think, like, a lot of their conflict is, like, tense, missed communication. Oh, now I remember. It's that, like, one person is trying to get a hold of the other person to tell them something really, really important, but that other person is wrapped up in something else and just genuinely misses their calls and misses their texts. But at, like, a really crucial moment that ends up in things kind of blowing up in their face. And I think like it's not miscommunication, but it's missed. You missed the opportunity to communicate when it was necessary. And I thought that like that tension was built well with the conflict between our focal characters here. Also need to give a warning that there is full-on like incest in this book. Like at the end of book 2, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but come on, I'm talking about book 3. If you're not caught up, you've got a whole 2 books to kind of forget that I said this. At the end of book 2, we're like, oh, accidental incest, what's gonna happen? And then it's like, oh, I guess, yeah, they do commit to it. I will say, there was a line buried, it's kind of a spoiler, but also, like, I feel like this is kind of a trigger trope warning that warrants vague spoileriness, before you get super invested in the series, if it sounds at all up your alley. There is a line in here that makes me think that the incest might not actually be. Have to read the 4th book to find out. For the purpose of reading this book of, like, smutty escapism, it fit the bill. Okay. So the next book I finished, that actually took me like 2 months to finish, was Reading Lolita in Tehran, a memoir in books by Azar Nafisi. And, oh, I didn't say, did I say who wrote the first one? Harvest of Sighs is written by Sierra Simone? Yep, Harvest of Sighs is by Sierra Simone. Reading Lolita in Tehran is by Azar Nafisi, and it's also narrated by the author. I partially read this on audiobook. So this took me a long time to read, because when I started reading it, I started reading it like the very beginning of January, and then the January 6th insurrection anniversary came around, and there were the trials and stuff, and there were things about that kind of felt too close, or like there were things in this that felt too close to home with that anniversary, so I kind of had to back off on reading it, and then here I am, like, reading it as, like, the shit in Ukraine is happening. So this was a tough read, just because the events in this book are hitting so much closer to home than I expected them to. So this is the memoir of Azar Nafisi, who is a university level literature professor, classic literature professor, and this is documenting her time, in Tehran, as there was this, the rise of a fundamentalist Islamic state government that really impacted, like, women's rights, her ability to teach, the kind of media that they were allowed to talk about. So the format, there were things I didn't like about this, was like the timeline is not super linear. Oh, so it's documenting her time there, and it documents kind of her early revolutionary days, her time as a literature professor, and then when I think she was still allowed to teach, but she refused to adhere to the curriculum restraints. So she quit teaching, but she had like a group of like 5 or 6 women who she would invite to her home and kind of do like an in-depth book club with them. That was actually, like, if it was discovered, like, they could be arrested because like such action was so subversive at the time. So what I didn't love was, I think, like, the story of her life was not super linear. It's like we kind of start with the introduction of the characters of the women in her reading group, and then we kind of like jump between like her early revolutionary days and some of her time like writing this book in retrospect, and then like her time teaching, and then her time in the book club. And I was kind of, especially like listening to it on audiobook and not being able to like refer back to like what date did she just say, what year was she referring to, I kind of lost track of like what's the timeline, like when, like this moment I'm listening to, what year is this happening, and that's partially that's like my poor retention of my poor ability to retain small details like the year that someone just mentioned, and so it might have been clearer if I was completely reading this physically, but because of the audiobook also, it kind of lost me a little bit. I don't think it's a bad thing, but personally, there are times where it's basically she's giving a lecture about some of the books that, I'm all over the place, y'all. We're trying. Where is this thing? Index? Yeah. So with this, like, the book is divided into 4 chapters where she's kind of paralleling themes in various books with themes in society. So of course she's talking about Lolita, by Nabokov. What's his first name? I forget. Which of course is where the title comes from. She talks about The Great Gatsby. She talks about James Joyce. James? Is it James Joyce? No, I think it's Henry James. Hold on. I don't remember. The chapter is just called James. And then she's talking about Jane Austen, and I think specifically Pride and Prejudice. What was I about to say? Oh, there are times where she's basically giving a very, very academic, very in-depth lecture about the themes of these books that sometimes just kind of got like a little bit too in the weeds for me, especially for books that I haven't read. I think of all of these. Well, I've read Gatsby in school, so I did study a lot of these themes. But then I haven't read Lolita. I haven't read anything by James, whichever James they're talking about. I think they were talking about Lady Chatterley's. No, they were talking about Madame Bovary. Madame Bovary is one of the ones they're talking about. Haven't read that. And then, like, I've read some Jane Austen, but just casually. I've never studied it. And that can be a very, very different experience in terms of, like, what you remember and, like, what kind of themes stand out to you. Now, if you're somebody who is a literature student who is studying one of these books, it might be really useful to, like, read the chapter, because she's going to have a lot of really interesting insights, especially pulling on the themes of these, like, white Western classics and applying them to what is going on in Tehran at the time. Like, I do think, like, that is really interesting, and I do think, like, if you are interested in the literary analysis aspect of it, I think it's really interesting. It's just sometimes, like, it just kind of lost me. It was just a little bit too cerebral for not just what I wanted out of this book, but also, like, where my mind has been the past couple of months. But that all said, it was very good. There's quite a few, like, standout quotes. Here's a quote about, like, why were these women willing to risk so much just to talk about books? And this paragraph says, "It allowed us to defy the repressive reality outside the room. Not only that, but to avenge ourselves on those who controlled our lives. For those few precious hours, we felt free to discuss our pains and our joys, our personal hang-ups and our weaknesses. For that suspended time, we abdicated our responsibilities to our parents, relatives, and friends, and to the Islamic Republic. We articulated all that happened to us in our own words and saw ourselves, for once, in our own image." So I think, like, where this book shines is, again, like, taking, like, themes from literature and applying them to this very different context. And then also, like, her reflection on, you know, the transition into this totalitarian regime, and, like, the nature of a invisible resistance. Like, the way that, like, their pursuit of literature, their pursuit of critical thinking, their pursuit of, like, camaraderie and, like, finding freedom in a way that's not, like, public protesting. Like, there was something very powerfully revolutionary in that, in the preservation of critical thought, in the preservation of curiosity. So I totally understand, like, the hype around this book. For context, this was an amnesia read. This is a book that, like, I picked up and read in high school, and, like, I didn't really remember anything about it. And you know what? I think part of that is, like, I had no world context. I think I'm definitely going to remember my feelings about this now, because everything this author is talking about, like, oh my god, we are not there yet, but it doesn't seem so inconceivable as it used to. So, which is, like, a terrifying thought, but it's also, like, fuck, let's get to work. Like, there's also something very galvanizing in that, like, it's not too late yet, because we're not here yet. Here's another thought. So in January, I read The Secret Commonwealth, and I had a comment about the author's description of, like, violence and, like, political and civil unrest in, I think the Lyra is, like, in Turkey, or, like, she's somewhere in the Levant, and, like, the way he was writing about it, I didn't really love. And I think it was especially highlighted in contrast to this book, because, like, this author, like, she's talking about her home. She's describing this violence, and she's describing these drastic, awful changes about a place that she loves, about a place that does have this beautiful, rich history that she does respect and she does love. And just, it was just very interesting, the contrast between, you know, someone who doesn't know that world describing it from afar versus somebody who lived through it and, you know, doesn't disrespect it, doesn't abhor it, doesn't hate it, doesn't resent it, who is describing, you know, the downfall of their home. It was a very interesting contrast. Okay. This is great in a very difficult way. Okay, next I finished A Snake Lies Waiting by Yong. This one is translated by Anna Holmlug and Gigi Chang, and I also mostly listened to this on audio. Narrated by Daniel York-Loh. So this is the third book in the Legends of the Condor series. Let's see, what did I write? Lotus continues to be my favorite character. In this one, in the beginning, we see her relationship with her Shifu, and who's like her martial arts master. Anyway, she can totally be like this totally selfish, spoiled brat, but then, like, when she does show care for someone, like, it's so sweet. Like, she's such an interesting character. Speaking of characters, so many characters, there's a huge portion of this book where there's, like, this like cabin that has a hidden compartment that Lotus and Huojing are watching, like, every character we have encountered in the past 2 books come through there, and it's like a whole bunch of, like, rival martial arts gangs or, like, schools or sects. I don't know, like, what the appropriate word is for every single group, but they all come through there. Like, we touch base with every single character that we've met, and I think there's something in book 4 that does that too. Actually, I think maybe all the books except the first one, where we're meeting all these characters for the first time. But it's like, oh my god, so many characters, but also we've met them all before, so it's nice to have a refresher. Oh, I wrote down, Guojing, he is so pure of heart. He actually figures out something by himself. So a recurring thing with Guojing, the young man main character, is he's not the brightest tool in the shed. You know, he's very determined. He's got very good work ethic. He will learn things through muscle memory, not because he actually understands them. So it was just, like, so victorious that, like, he actually figures something out for himself without having somebody have to explain it to him. That was really rewarding. And the ending, we get a lot of insight into the Beggar clan, which is just a very, I don't know how historically accurate that kind of thing is, but it was just really interesting to just see the dynamics of that clan and, like, their, just, like, the kind of power and influence that they have. Like, technically they're, like, at the lowest social strata, but they're also, like, very influential in their own way. Anyway, that was a thing I enjoyed in the story. And I finished book 4 in March, so I will tell you about my final thoughts on the series next month. So then I had another amnesia read. I picked up Redwall. This is the first book in the series. This is by Brian Jacques. So this is a middle grade, kind of medieval-ish fantasy with these anthropomorphic animals, mostly, let's see, we've got mice, hares, badgers, rats. Rats are the bad guys. We've got some talking birds, you know, kind of like, English countryside woodland creatures. And it focuses around Redwall Abbey, which is a giant, monastery-like compound that it's not totally religious, like it's not like religious in worship of a god, but it's like the members of the abbey kind of devote their life to nonviolence and service and generosity. Anyway, so my thoughts on this was like, oh my god, this is so fucking charming, but also like super violent. There is like simple language and themes for young readers, but it also doesn't talk down to them. We definitely see some like really kind of quite brutal violence, I think, for the age range. But see, wait, when was this one first published? 1986, I think. And this is also from a British author, so their sensibilities might be a little different than what we expected of a middle grade age range in the US. So kind of an example of like simple language and themes. Like, it's not just there are the good guys and there are the bad guys, but we clearly see distinct morals and ethics and behaviors in these. Like the good guys are generous and kind and brave and selfless, and the bad guys are greedy and violent and disloyal and gross. So there's definitely a lot of display of, if you choose a life where you are greedy and you lie a lot, look what's going to happen to you. Whereas if you, are loyal to your friends and you're always willing to help people, like, that things are going to turn out better. I'm definitely going to add, let's see, I think I own 6 books in total, so I'm definitely going to add the, other 5 into my Amnesia Reads TBRs in the future. I know there was a time, this is one of the, excuse my watery eyes because it's springtime and everything's blooming. At the time, this was one of the series where I would go to the library and I would just look at what books they had available, and I would check out anything that I hadn't read before. I don't know, I think there's well over 20 books in the series. And I've definitely not read some of the newest ones. I don't know if this author is still alive. But so I know that there's some that I've never read, but then there's a bunch that I have read that I don't own, but this was also 20 years ago at least. So I feel like this is a series that I will turn to when I need just some cozy adventure. That's what it is. It's a cozy adventure. All right, what's next? Oh, okay. So next I listened to the audiobook of Blood Rites. This is book number 6 in the Dresden files. This is by Jim Butcher and then narrated by James Marsters. He's fantastic in this, narrating the series. This is the book that has my favorite intro ever. It's the intro where Harry acquires his dog. And it opens with him running down the hallway of an abandoned school at night, carrying a box of magical puppies, being chased by flying monkey demons that throw flaming poop. It's chaotic, and it leaves you with a lot of questions, but it's also just another day at the office for poor Harry. I think this is also the book where I felt like the writing kind of matured a little bit. I think the author started playing around with the action adventure formula a little bit. I really like the friendship development between Harry and the vampire Thomas. I think the contrast, the similarities and contrast of their personalities is interesting, and then the ways that they eventually get to be tied together. I thought that plot line was interesting, because also Harry is someone who partially the nature of his job, but also his what is your trauma, man kind of attitude is he has a really hard time letting people in and trusting people. So seeing the way that like this friendship develops by choice, but then also the way that it has to develop by circumstances is interesting. Anyway, yeah, so the plot formula I think has like finessed a little bit by book 6. I think we get like more gradual character development and like world development. It's not just constant crisis. That's the thing, is like all the former books felt like constant crisis, with a little bit of world building in there, and I felt like this one, it's not like the action that completely drops off, but like our Harry's just not like constantly putting out fires. He's like getting a big reveal and then like actually like making a plan and figuring out how that fits into the grander scheme of things, and he's actually like building something solid rather than like just running around on 0 sleep and good luck. So a common complaint with this book is kind of like the misogyny, very, very dated depictions of women. So I think like in the last book I said like, oh my god, he actually like gives Karen information and doesn't just like try to protect her and leave her in the dark, and great. I feel like we backslid a little bit, but it's because the main plot of the book revolves around the movie shoot of a porn film. So there's some very heteronormative, red-blooded male descriptions of the female actresses. It kind of comes with the territory. And I think there's also a moment where like a description of a woman who's injured, and of course like Harry, our narrator, takes a moment to say something like, she's a little skinnier than I like them. I'm like, really? She's like bleeding out on the floor, and that's not necessary information. Like, really? That's the kind of shit that bothers me, is like, it's one thing to describe a porn actress walking around in lingerie. That kind of comes with the territory. But when, again, like, you've got like an injured woman lying on the floor and your brain is like trying to figure out how to help her, like, you don't need to judge how attractive you find her in that moment. Like, don't do that. But I think we only really spend like about a third of the book on the movie set. And the author also does like describe that like the making of such a thing is nowhere near as sexy as the finished product, which, as somebody who works in performing arts, I appreciate that little dose of reality. Of like, yeah, like the weird contortionist angles they would have to get for some of that shit. I think it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse while being par of the course for the time period and like the author's writing style. So it's one of those like, you took a baby step backwards. Not a full step, just like a little one. But we're just gonna judge you book by book. So the next book I read was a historical romance. This is The Highwayman's Folly by Daria Vernon. This is an independently published novel. And I think I made a little review. I wrote a review of this on Goodreads. I picked up this copy off of Pango, because this was definitely one I wanted to read, and it's one, like, because it's independently published, you can only get it on Amazon. I think you might be able to get like the physical book from Bookshop or like other online booksellers, but like the ebook is only available on Kindle. Hold on, I wrote a little review of this. Let me save my brain and just read you that. So this cover is, it is strangely vintage, but like tasteful and updated at the same time. Like, I'm intrigued. Oh wait, oh no, it wasn't on Goodreads, it was on my Instagram. That's where it is. My Goodreads and my Instagram will be linked in the description box below. Do that influencer thing. Come on, internet. You can reach this corner of the bedroom. So I'm just gonna read this to you. to save my brain, and it says everything that I wanted you to know. So it starts with a quote. Beth looked down at her hands as if to confirm that there was no embroidery hoop there. No, she dodged those spheres of dull oblivion and shaped her life into something else entirely. Instead of a man like Ham breaking her down like a horse and boasting about it, she discovered one who blew on her sparks of bad behavior until they became bonfires. And then I said, excuse me, I need book 2 immediately, which just came out in March. It's called The Rogue's Last Letter. I will be reading that sometime this year. Let's see. Historical romance with an independent, strong heroine. Check. A love interest who admires her precisely because of all of her traits that polite society looks down upon. Check. Adventure. Check. A romantic conflict that doesn't rely on pettiness, stubbornness, or simple miscommunication. Check. Let me see if I can just tell you the premise. So Beth is a unmarried woman, like in her 30s. She had a youthful indiscretion, so she's kind of avoided marriage because she kind of has a bad reputation. She is has just inherited some property from like an aunt or a great grand aunt or something, and somebody kidnaps her because they want to force her into marriage so that they can acquire that wealth. And then as they are traveling with her, they get set upon by highwaymen, and she gets kidnapped again. So, these new, the leader of the new group of kidnappers, they kind of fall for each other. You know, he doesn't mean to kidnap her. He means to, like, just rob the carriage, but then, like, things happen, and he's like, you're a witness. I don't fucking know what to do with you. Ha. So they kind of fall for each other, but eventually she kind of escapes and gets returned home. And then 3 years pass, and our highwayman has thankfully found himself a more honest line of work and meets up with her again. And he's got some information about the man who initially tried to kidnap her because he's kind of still out there. So it's kind of like the adventure of, you know, trying to put this looming threat away for good, and then also her and the highwayman. And let's see, the series is called The Rewards of Ruin, and it's, you know, okay, because she's had a bad reputation, she doesn't have to worry about ruining her reputation because it's already ruined. What freedom does that grant her? And then also, like, because of him and his past, there's kind of a similar thing of, like, you know, to be ruined, to be considered like a ruined woman or have a ruined reputation. It presents new opportunities. And I think that's kind of like the theme of like both these books. So I had a great time with this. This was exactly what I was in the mood for. It was very, very escapist. And I really like the writing. Yeah. So. Hurrah! So next, so February is supposed to be, you know, Black History Month, Black Heritage Month, and just where I was in my head, I was so mood ready. There were things that came available in my library, so I didn't read all Black authors all month, but I'm like, oh my god, I have to read something at least. Like, I should be reading Black authors all year long, but I can't not read at least one this month. So I picked up the smallest one on my shelf, which is Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. What I didn't realize is how tiny the print is. Ooh. But then I did pick up the audiobook for this, which I didn't write down who the narrator is, but all that information will also be in the description box below. So I mostly listened to this on audiobook because his writing is dense but beautiful, and that's, I think, my biggest takeaway is there's a lot in this. There's not a lot of plot in this story, but the writing is beautiful. So the plot is basically we follow John, Yeah, the morning of his 14th birthday. So he's 14. His father is a preacher. He lives in this very conservative religious community. So it's his birthday. He's got like a tense relationship with his father and his brother. And John's storyline is there's definitely a lot of like queer coding of his character. And he's definitely in an environment and of an age where he doesn't really realize that he might be queer, and he's also really uncomfortable with the societal restraints of his religious upbringing, but he's at an age where he doesn't really understand what is wrong. So he's kind of starting to rebel and be uncomfortable and kind of push at the bounds of like, you know, what of his life. But he doesn't really understand like where this motivation's coming from. He just knows that like he like doesn't trust his father. He doesn't, you know, he's got like a lot of it's very like teenage angsty, but also like with reason. Like the environment he's in is something that he's going to have to escape from. So it's him kind of dealing with that. And then we also get the background story of his aunt, his father, and his mother. And kind of their, a lot of them, they, what, wait, did I take notes? Yay! I wrote such evocative writing. Oh, yeah. Hold on. Where is that? So, like, there is something about the way that James Baldwin describes spaces, like environments, settings, that is really evocative. So this one, for some reason, stood out to me. It was dark in the church. Street lights had been snapping on all around him on the populous avenue. The light of the day was gone. His feet seemed planted on this wooden floor. They did not wish to carry him one step further. The darkness and silence of the church pressed on him, cold as judgment, and the voices crying from the window might have been crying from another world. John moved forward, hearing his feet crack against the sagging wood, to where the golden cross on the red field of the altar cloth glowed like smothered fire and switched on one weak light. In the air of the church hung, perpetually, the odor of dust and sweat. For, like the carpet in his mother's living room, the dust of this church was invincible, and when the saints were praying or rejoicing, their bodies gave off an acrid, steamy smell, a marriage of the odors of dripping bodies and soaking starched white linen. Juicy. Rich and juicy writing. What else did I write? It reads like a dark parable. There's a lot of language in here that feels very influenced by the cadence and vocabulary of the Bible. And I had the thought of like, I wonder what it reads like to somebody who has like never really read the Bible, or who has never really, because like, I grew up attending a Catholic school. My family's not really practicing, but like I grew up like very familiar with that kind of language and with the way that like these lessons and these parables have been told. So I'm just very curious if there's somebody who just is not familiar with biblical writing, like what this feels like to them. But yeah, it feels like a dark parable. Let's see, and I also said there's an interesting tension of the characters struggling against the constrictions of their faith, but also seeing how the Black Church is such a vessel of strength and pride. So there's not really like an epic plot story. It's very character and theme based. But yeah, James Baldwin is such a masterful writer. So there's that. Let's see. And then the last book I finished, got another Black author. This is Kingdom of Souls by Rena Barron. This is like an ARC copy that I found in a free library. So let's see. This is a very strong YA fantasy debut. like, of course, like like in the description, this of course bears a comparison to Children of Blood and Bone. It's based on West African mythology and culture. We've got some like magic that is kind of like death magic. But I think like the comparison kind of dwindles from there, and I like this one so much better. I think it did well the things that I didn't really get along with in that series, in that other series. I also really got echoes of Tamora Pierce, which I think it's very much in our main character's like relationship with her mother. I don't know really how to explain it, but there's something about that reminds me of Tamora Pierce. So if you really liked her writings, I think you would like this. Let's see. Oh, and also like the way the presentation of god figures and the ways that they relate to humans and the ways they interact with humans, that feels very familiar to a lot of Tamora Pierce's writings, particularly her Wild Magic series. Anyway, but yeah, I love the complex relationship between our character Ara and her mother. Her mother is not really a good person, but like she's also complex. Like she's, we don't just have, we have a spectrum. Like we've got like your good people and like your bad people, and we've got like a spectrum of people in between. And there's like some who like serve the big bad, who it's like but your motivations are like nice and complex. Like it's not such a black and white world, which is I think a really important thing to have in YA, because I think like in contrast to something like Redwall, you kind of need a very clear distinction between good guys and bad guys when you're talking to a very young reader, because you're trying to instill strong values early. But I think once you're a teenager and you're starting to really you now have life experience to show you how complex the world is, I think you need to see that reflected in the stuff you're reading, so you can kind of start to work out the complexity of people's motivations and desires through fiction. Yeah. So there was a character called Elia, not sure how to pronounce it. But I wish we had seen more development of her from a child to an adult, because I think the book like very clearly like lays out it's kind of a spoiler like who she is and her development, but I just have to touch on it because I think she's very interesting. But I felt like there was a missed opportunity to really see her development from like this child with all this potential to where she ends up near the like as an adult. Like it's kind of like explained on page, and I wish we had like seen it rather than been told it so much. But overall, like very strong debut. I think it's a trilogy, and I think book 3 comes out later this year, so I will be like trying to check out book 2 like next month or the month after, and then it'll be like another month or 2, and then book 3 will be out. So fuck yeah. Great. That's it. Those are all my books. Hurrah! We finished. Okay, that's it. That's the video. You are a champ. If you have made it to the end of the video, leave me a mouse or a sword emoji in honor of Redwall. And I guess there's also swords in some of these other books. Anyway, alright. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I encourage you to go out into the world and be curious. I will have all of my social media places, and in addition to some like donation and resource links in the description box below, along with like author details and everything for all of these books if you want to refer to them. Yeah, I will catch you folks in the next video. Enjoy some bloopers. Hold on. I thought I was prepared, but shit, guess not. How's my lipstick? Because I was reading, because I have to think, oh my god, now I have to do my outro.